But when you start to get into a more coordinated approach, especially around enterprise accounts, you really have to be on the same page.
Welcome back to Go-to-Market Excellence. This is Dan Quirk here. I am joined by Doug Houvener. He is the Senior Manager of RevOps at WebPT. WebPT is the leading physical therapy software company for outpatient rehab. And that's pretty cool timing because Doug is actually in his second month in RevOps, having just moved over from leading account-based marketing at WebPT. So Doug, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
And also, congratulations are in order. Doug actually just won a B2B Marketing Exchange Award for account targeting and strategy for all the ABM work he's been putting out there. So describe what the recognition means for you, Doug, after all the hard work you've put in over the last year.
Yeah, thank you. First and foremost, it's great to be here. It's actually kind of funny, like the first month I'm not in marketing is the first time I won an award. So had to laugh a little bit at that. But
oh, the irony.
Yeah, I know, right? It's a good way to close out the marketing career, I guess.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, so kind of a neat story. We really built the ABM program at WebPT from the ground up, and the contents of this award really is focused specifically around getting alignment across all of our tech stack inside the org and making sure everything's rowing in the same direction. So the big pieces on that were our rollout of Terminus and Sigster across the org, as well as we started using a gifting platform called Alice. You've probably heard of that.
Yeah, I have. They're hiring a RevOps person, I just saw.
Well, there you go. There's a plug. Go work for Alice. They're great. But we basically built kind of a cohesive targeting strategy with our BDRs around a couple of events as well as product launches. So just getting our tech stack in alignment and getting, I should probably throw some stats out there. I know for one of the campaigns we launched through Sigster, we basically built a really tailored targeted list, probably down to about 400 prospects that we really wanted to be at this event. I think we got about 18% click-through rate on that. So that was a really, really cool result from that Sigster campaign. And then, obviously that turns into pipeline down the line. So, it honored to be nominated. It's cool to see our work kind of turn into an award eventually. And, I'm excited to move into the world of RevOps now.
For sure, yeah. Well, we're going to talk about that. You mentioned alignment, you mentioned tech stack, so let's get into it. You started the ABM efforts as part of, you told me, WebPT's strategic shift to focus upmarket on larger clinics, larger rehab systems, maybe part of hospital systems. So describe what it was like when you realized that a really solid RevOps foundation was going to be the key to a successful ABM. And tell us about that.
Yeah, so I would say I probably realized it in the opposite order. And it's funny, I feel like throughout my career, I've found things where I'm like, oh, this is frustrating or this is challenging. Why is it this way? And then I kind of back myself into sorry, I'm going to start over that answer because
no
your CRO sent me a huddle and I got a notification.
All right, I'll ask the question again, no problem.
All right, hang on one second. Make sure why. All right, cool. Just typing. All right, cool. Yeah, go ahead. Ask me that again, and I'll.
All right. Yeah, no problem. Okay, so let me just make a quick mark of where I'm going to cut. So let's start right there. You mentioned tech stack, you mentioned alignment. We're going to get into all that. But you started the ABM efforts at WebPT because of a strategic shift you guys were making to focus upmarket on larger clinics, rehab facilities, maybe part of hospital systems, things like that. Describe what it was like when you realized that a solid RevOps foundation was going to be the key to success with ABM.
Yeah, I think throughout my career, it's kind of funny. I feel like I realized these things in backwards order. So just recognizing the frustration and challenges of like, why is sales not using my stuff? Why don't these systems talk to each other? So I spent a majority of my time early on building this ABM program, just making sure that like the activity the reps are doing is mapping to the right places in Salesforce, and that we're having conversations with sales about what they actually need to have meaningful conversations. And I would say, I don't think it's anyone's fault, but when I started, sales, success, and marketing were all kind of operating in their own land, which can kind of work if you're talking about like an inbound model where you can kind of just throw stuff over the fence. But when you start to get into a more coordinated approach, especially around enterprise accounts, you really have to be on the same page. And that means, when the buyer actually decides to buy something, they get handed over to success, and there's no gap in coverage there. Everything kind of flows together seamlessly. And as I started to work on building those relationships across the functions, I realized like, wait, there's actually like a career that does this. It's a thing that I found myself doing regularly anyway. Like all the way back to when I first started in marketing, found myself in operations type work a lot, vetting software, building processes, automating things so that we don't have to spend a bunch of time in spreadsheets and things like that. So, when we started talking about consolidating sales and success into a revenue organization, I went to our CRO and I was like, I got to be a part of this, man. Like, and he agreed with me, thankfully. So,
gaps in alignment across the revenue function were really while you were trying to run ABM and ABX as they call it these days.
Mm-hmm.
That was really that you were like, oh man, there's all these gaps. There's got to be someone to fill them. I'm filling them now, and that's actually a job that other people are doing at other companies. That's kind of how it went.
Yeah. I'm intimately familiar with a lot of the challenges and the processes between functions just because of how deep in the trenches I was already. So it is a bit right now, even though it is the first 60 days and it's definitely chaotic. It's nice because I don't feel like I have to do as much discovery as I would if I had just joined the organization. Being so close with sales and success before joining RevOps or starting our team here, I know what drives each of those teams pretty closely, and I've built a lot of relationships with those leaders, so that part is definitely helpful.
Mm-hmm. And ops is obviously critical to your ABM success and the success of your ABM strategy. Is that where most of the focus goes now on ABM, or do you have other people working on more of the high velocity stuff? Where's the biggest need, I guess, these days for ops to come in, and what are the needs?
I would say a majority of what I'm spending my time on right now is just making sure that we have repeatable, scalable processes that have customer experience in mind. Everybody has a job to do, and before we had a RevOps team, and I think the value of a RevOps team is being that connective tissue across your revenue journey, right, or your customer journey, or at WebPT we call it a member journey. Making sure that there's somebody who's watching all the handoff points and also optimizing any kind of areas where people are getting hung up, where you might have revenue leakage, or there's just things that you're like, if I were a customer, this wouldn't make sense to me. And being the neutral arbiter of those discussions, I find myself using a lot of analogies early on as we're starting to establish this team. WebPT's over $100 million company, and we're just now starting RevOps. So a lot of the discussions I'm having are educational. Like, what does my team do? Why are we here? Why are we focused? And I pretty much have been telling people, like, look, we're a referee. We're not here to tell you who's winning. We're just here to officiate what's going on and point people in the right direction where there's gaps or where we might have areas to optimize.
Yeah, you don't have any favorites, right? And I'm super curious. You said $100 million company, and you're just now establishing the RevOps. What were the strategic challenges that drove leadership to say, okay, now's the time. We're finally there where we need to formalize this function?
It's It's a really good question. Let me think about that one. I don't make you ask the question again, but it might make sense.
No problem.
This is one of those where I'm like, I want to tread lightly.
Yeah, I mean, don't give up any, secrets or anything.
It's a good question, and that's why I'm like, I think. All right, I've got two things that I think are helpful here.
Okay.
You want me to just start answering, or do you want to ask me?
Just jump right in if you're comfortable with that, and I'll put the timestamp.
Cool. Yeah, so I think there's kind of two driving factors to what inspired, hey, we need a RevOps team. I think first and foremost was the creation of our CRO role. So our former SVP of sales moved into the CRO role, and he took success in sales underneath him. And obviously, when you have two large teams like that are responsible for a lot of revenue, having a team that actually ties things together and makes sure that all the processes are aligned is really important. So I think that was a big piece of it. And I think the other one is really starting to align the entire organization towards the North Star of making sure that we're putting our customer first. And I don't think some people may interpret that as like the customer is always right, do everything you can to make the customer happy. I appreciated the nuance that our CRO put on it, which is it's not necessarily that they need to be right all the time. We need to do everything that, even if we're like hurting the company to make them happy. It's more about if we're doing something that's not making them happy, what can we do and change internally to make it better? It's not just an episodic thing. It's more focused on the processes and the way we're approaching the customer. And I think as we started to dive more into that, it's like, who's going to own that? That can't be a side project of operations. It can't be a side project of finance, marketing, sales, success. We need a team that is watching for this and is a trusted advisor anytime we're doing anything, from launching a product to figuring out how we can better serve somebody who wants more custom support. How can we pull RevOps in to help make that a reality? And what do we need to build out to make that a thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Next question that's coming to mind is, so you're now moving from this role where you're running ABM, and it's pretty obvious what the goals are, pipeline, sourcing pipeline and deals, right? Now that you've slid over to RevOps and you're looking more broadly across the whole go-to-market engine, what's been told to you? Like, what have they told you that your goals are? How are you going to be measured beyond just the top line?
Yeah, obviously the majority of how we're measuring success is everybody hitting their number. But I think from my perspective and the way that I want to set this team up and set the expectation early on is we're here to make sure that your job's being done and it's the issues that you have are being addressed. And so we're really focusing on building metrics for RevOps in particular around throughput, as well as priority, age of cases and issues as they come up. Again, not everything can be shoved into a case flow like you would if you're managing like Salesforce tickets, but we're trying to create a lot of visibility around the work we're doing so that people know, hey, I didn't just throw this stuff over to RevOps and they forgot about me because there's other fires they're focused on. Mm-hmm. We basically set up an internal tracking mechanism through an app called ClickUp that allows us to show public to the internal team, obviously, project lists. So they can see, here's the priorities, here's where everything's at. I submitted a request to Doug 2 weeks ago about this process. Let me check the priority list and see where it's at. Some of that is selfish, right? I don't want to be the one answering every single question about where we're at on projects, but I also like publicizing that, and maybe that's my background in marketing. I love messaging and giving people proof that we're actually doing what they want us to do.
Yeah, I love that process you put in place, and I want to dig into that in just a minute. But I have one more question about the whole ABM thing, because it was obviously key for you guys to go up market. But it's not like you were struggling. You were dominating the SMB market, right? You guys, I think you shared in our first meeting that you were the third most searched and third. Your WebPT was basically the third most searched source of physical therapy information on the internet, right? And so you guys were dominating SMB. What were the market dynamics? Specifically WebPT, what can you share about what was going on that made you guys say, okay, we need to go up market, and then next step ABM is the play?
Yeah, it's an interesting market in that I think a lot of retail healthcare is starting to go this way, but PT in particular has a lot of single provider, a couple provider locations, and then there's also the other end of the spectrum where there are very large aggregators in the market. So, PT only has two publicly traded companies now, but there are a handful, I want to say 30 or so in the country that have over 100 locations. And so, no, I said that wrong. Let's start over. I want to make sure I get that data point right, because it's like there's not a lot, so it's all right.
Yeah, you're good. Just
the dynamics have changed. I want to recap my answer really quick.
Yeah. So, what were the market dynamics that made you guys decide to go up market if you were dominating SMB already, and then why was ABM the go-to-market strategy to do that?
Yeah, so we have a cool market. It's very interesting too. So there's a very large appetite for M&A in physical therapy right now. So there's a lot of mom and pop shops, local practices that are one or two providers. That makes up a pretty large percentage of the number of providers in the market. And then you look up market all the way to the very top of the spectrum, and there's about 20 companies in the country that have over 100 locations. The very top of that spectrum is a group that has 1,400 locations. But a lot of those groups basically buy up the smaller practices. And so we're seeing a really large consolidation motion in physical therapy right now. It's also attractive for private equity because, the profit margins are pretty solid. And also, as you look forward towards not to go too far down a healthcare rabbit hole, but if you look toward the future of where healthcare is headed, preventive medicine is obviously a very large consideration as you look at like the opioid crisis and things like that. So physical therapy as a means of preventing that is becoming a very, very desirable market to get into. Mm-hmm. So when we look at the market, we see consolidation happening like crazy, and these are large organizations that maybe aren't engaging with a lot of our inbound content, where we got a lot of success with the smaller business market. A lot of owner-operator types, and if you mentioned our standing on the physical therapy information, we're only behind the APTA and Medicare.
Flex.
Yeah. But a lot of owner-operators, right? Like someone who's treating patients and running their business, that's where our blog's super helpful. Our content really dives into stuff that'll help them run good practices. But if you look at market, we've got executives coming from other retail healthcare settings like vet practices and urgent care and things like that, where it's not necessarily physical therapist mindset, but more of a business mindset. And it also expanded the target market, right? Like we're looking at maybe one or two people making decisions towards the bottom end of the market, and we get up to the enterprise and it's 6 to 8 people who sign off on these deals. So when we start to combine all those factors, we're like, the real answer here is to focus everybody in on building relationships and building a groundswell with the executive layer at these organizations. So that kind of all rolled up into a lot of thought leadership campaigns and events. 2020 was rough for us because events are a very large portion of that strategy, but we pivoted very quickly because we have a badass events team into digital, didn't miss a beat. But that has been a big piece of our strategy, is like getting a thought leadership basis for conversations so people know that we're a trusted advisor in the space. We're obviously the one people turn to when they need direction. And then we leverage, because we have such a large share of the market, we can leverage some of our own anonymized user data to do thought leadership. So a really cool project that we worked on last year was a COVID impact report, where we basically reported out trends in visits based on the state and what data we were seeing inside our own organization. So people can kind of benchmark where they're seeing like visits per therapist in their own practice against what we see across the market. So yeah, lots of cool data projects over there.
Yeah, and the shift to go up market, that happened a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, or was it longer than that?
Yeah, I would say the shift to go up market started when our CEO Nancy Ham started.
Okay.
We definitely brought her in to help us with that motion, and I came in, I don't know, a couple months after that. So I've been at WebPT almost 4 years, and it's probably been about a 3.5-year project so far.
So what are the what additional metrics or KPIs is WebPT now looking at as a ABM go-to-market, as along with more of a inbound velocity approach? Is it similar metrics or totally different set of some KPIs?
Yeah, so we have a pretty robust inbound engine, as I'm sure you can imagine. We track enterprise metrics against that as well, though the volume is significantly lower, right? The CEO of a $20 million business isn't usually filling out a demo form on the blog. But so we have that, obviously, just so we're getting metrics on inbound from enterprise perspective, but we also focus really heavily on target account lists and getting engagement within those target accounts. The tricky part with our software, our product in general, really anybody who sells an EMR or a CRM, like a large system of record, the tricky part about that sales and marketing process is that rarely are you going to generate demand in a large company. Usually the pain of the switch, or the perceived pain of the switch, has to be great enough for them to jump. And so what we noticed in enterprise is really like, let's build relationships and thought leadership proactively, so that when somebody's like, you know what, we need to look at a new documentation engine, or we need a new billing solution, who should we look at? WebPT's top of mind. And so with that in mind, we focus really heavily on target account lists, as well as we created a BDR function as a part of all this climb up market. I worked with our head of sales to build it. And we built a point system based on engagement. So if you look at, we basically stack rank seniority level and then the impact of the touches. So, email back, call back, rep call, consultation, demo, in-person event. And then we basically rank those from left to right and by seniority level. And each of those interactions that come back into Salesforce, we built a series of reports that basically roll up points for the BDRs every month. And it's a way to quantify something that's always really hard to do in ABM, which is like, how do you show momentum towards an account without having some kind of MQL number, right? Like, you need to quantify the touches. And so we built it so that it's all inbound stuff, or things where people are opting in, raising their hand, joining us for things, and then roll up points accordingly by account, by rep, obviously. And that is another goal that the ABM team works towards, helping those reps hit their number.
This is getting a little in the weeds, but let's do it. Do all leads come in as a lead in Salesforce, or do your ABM accounts get imported in as accounts and contacts?
Yeah, we set up, so marketing, actually, myself and the coordinator on the team, we basically built out, I would say for the top 100 accounts in the market, we made a project the back half of last year to identify the account, do all kinds of background research on their tech stack, so like built with, to look and see if they have anything that indicates a level of technical sophistication. Mm-hmm. And then also go through, build out the entire C-suite, VP level, director level. So we have org charts for a majority of those as well. And then create those as contacts in Salesforce, so that as stuff comes in, it gets mapped to them directly. Yeah.
Did you, was it some debate over whether you should import them as leads or contacts? And how did you guys sort that out?
It honestly wasn't a debate. It's kind of our demand gen team hasn't really ever focused on enterprise, and so I guess the benefit to me in particular is that they basically were like, do it how you want it. And from our perspective, creating contacts was just a lot easier because we're not really waiting for an inbound motion. We're going out and hunting and building relationships. So it's an extra step in the process that probably would have created additional complexity from our SDRs. So we just skipped right by it.
Gotcha.
And honestly, if you want to get into the real weeds, I wish we could just pick leads or contacts and stick with it. When we get into from our perspective, we do a lot of upsell. So some of our inbound motions for upsell get challenging because we can't create leads for people who exist as contacts already. I feel like Salesforce didn't have the lead functionality. It would have been figured out by now, but we're starting to get into creating custom objects for upsell because we can't accurately track what we want to.
Interesting. Yeah, I know that's a constant thing that I was part of some ABM campaigns in the past, and we loaded them in as leads, I believe, because we wanted to see. But then you have the whole issue with orphan leads. When one converts, do the others come along, or if you import them as cold prospects or whatever, and then somebody comes to your website on their own while they're being prospected, fills out a form or whatever. Are they do they get attributed to the ABM program? Do they get attributed to your whatever web source they came in on? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Did you run into any of those issues when you uploaded them as contacts, or did that help you avoid all those issues?
I was just going to say it actually helped us avoid a lot of that because we set up the lead source detail exactly how we wanted it, got everybody mapped to the right accounts, and didn't have to rely on form fills for things like titles, phone numbers, emails, all that stuff. We just did what we could to get all that data, and thankfully some of it was in Pardot, because we have such a large database, being around for over a decade, we have a pretty hefty database of pretty much most people in PT, so we can validate email structure and stuff like that against it as well. That helps with building out contacts we haven't talked to before.
Yeah. Interesting. So how, if there's another RevOps person listening to this, I'm sure there's other RevOps people listening to this. I hope there's other RevOps people. And they are, they're running an ABM program, and they're just kind of at the beginnings of helping manage that from an ops perspective. What do you tell them? What's one thing that they have to keep in mind in order to do it successfully?
What would I tell them?
Perhaps there's more than one. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hang on, my son just got home. I'm going to shut the door really quick.
Oh, cool.
Otherwise, he'll come running in here during the interview.
It wouldn't be a problem. Is he in RevOps? I'm kidding.
Yeah. Maybe some days for. Let me think about that. I'm trying to think of the struggles that I faced right away.
If there's nothing, we can move on to. If there's nothing,
it's so much. It's like hard to. I would say probably data integrity.
Let's get into it. Yeah, let's get into the data integrity. I'll ask you the question again, and then we can go from there. All right, Doug, so if there's another RevOps person, they're about to launch an ABM program, or they're running the, helping to build the infrastructure for the next ABM campaign, what do you tell them from your experience in doing this for 4+ years?
Have a plan for your data. You will capture a lot. You'll probably get a lot of intel back from reps, or if you have like a BDRs or SDRs helping with it, as well as our team does a lot of market research, and trying to create a centralized source of truth for that account, no matter where they're at in the funnel. If they're a customer and you're trying to get more upsell out of them, or if you're going after a net new white whale, point everybody back to a system of record. Obviously, most people at Salesforce. But when we started building the program, we were using spreadsheets a bit. And then as we got a little bit more sophisticated, we started building that out in Salesforce, where we're tracking things like, for competitive reasons, like obviously we're looking for like what their current documentation system might be if it's not WebPT, or any other additional pieces of their tech stack, what their org chart looks like, what we know about their website. All of that stuff like eventually becomes valuable to you depending on where you're at in the cycle. Even if they finally raise their hand for a demo, you can hand all that over to the rep, and the rep basically is like, cool, you've got the whole rundown of the organization. I can go check out their website and learn more about them. And that becomes, it's one of those things where at the time you're like, this seems like maybe not super useful to spend all my time documenting stuff about a prospective account. But from our perspective, like the amount of research we do ahead of time changes the game and the discussion later on, especially from an enablement perspective.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like you're talking about figure out the data that you need to equip the reps, and also the data that you need to make decisions and measure the performance of it.
Yep.
That's how I interpret it. How would you say it?
Yeah, that's exactly what I would say. Build a profile for your accounts, and not just tribal knowledge can be a Achilles heel, especially when you're talking about going up market, larger accounts. There's going to be reps who are maybe territorial with that information. They're like, I know everything about this. I don't want anybody else to know it. And we kind of democratize that process a little bit, and basically build account profiles for the top 100. And that kind of, it changes the motions for like the BDRs who are going, all right, let me go look at this account and see, all right, cool, this PT practice is using Drift on their website, which is frankly pretty rare. Right. But if my BDR is like, damn, all right, they've got somebody on marketing who understands the value of Drift, so I'm going to tweak my message a bit when we're talking about our marketing automation platform. They clearly understand the complexities of that, so I don't have to dumb this down. I want to have a really meaningful conversation. And then there's also the ancillary effects of things like that, like the amount of platforms now that are using domain for matching emails to accounts or tracking activity on an account level. If you're not putting domain or website in the Salesforce record, you're never going to be able to capture that. And so some of that like base level demographic or firmographic information we weren't capturing before has really helped us get more sophisticated.
Gotcha. And as far as being able to surface the proper reports and intelligence to leadership, did you guys have some planning sessions to figure out what they needed to make decisions, or was that kind of like a learn as we go, build reports on the fly type of thing?
I was just talking to somebody about this last week, actually, because they were asking, hey, did you build out the whole plan before you started running, or did you just kind of build the car as you drove it? And I'm a huge fan of not keeping it simple, right? Like there's the Pareto principle, but there's something that's similar to that I heard once, which is like 80% is good enough 80% of the time. And so I've kind of approached a lot of the work I do as like, all right, this is good enough. Let's move forward instead of getting hung up on getting everything perfect right at the start. I think when you look at ABM in general, it gets so big so fast from a strategy and reporting perspective. How am I going to quantify all these things, all these touches? I need to build all this automation to make sure that we can put it into a nice dashboard. Some of that is, a lot of marketing is trained specifically around inbound and demand gen, which that reporting, and a lot of people who come from that background are going to expect certain type of reporting, which isn't really possible with ABM.
That's right.
So what we wound up doing is basically, hey, here's what we're doing from a plan perspective. Are you guys good with it? We'll get back to you with like the impact and the results from the event. And as we did probably a year and a half to that, we had a couple really large events where we were basically looking at like, we know we want to get these people in the room. We know what the potential value of these accounts is, but what else do we want to do that's going to move the company forward and align with our goals? And we kind of have been relatively flexible with what the goals are year over year. if there's specific targets we have for product launches, or again, like, that target list that I mentioned earlier, top 100, some of our goals for those events revolve around getting a certain percentage of the top 100 in attendance, for example. All that to say, we focused more on action than getting it right the first time, and knowing that we can be agile and flexible. It really takes it's still stressful. It takes a little bit of stress out of it if you're not trying to get it perfect the first time.
Yeah, for sure. I am getting a little bit of choppiness on your end. Is that happening for me as well, or are you having internet issues?
Hang on one sec. Let me...
Yeah, take your time.
It's funny because this happens like as soon as my son gets home.
Because he starts using the devices?
Mm-hmm. He's probably got the TV on in the living room. Is that better? Or slightly better? I'm hardwired, so I have my Wi-Fi on, so that usually.
All right, I think it's improving now.
Cool. Did that chop up everything?
It was a little choppy, but it's not a problem.
Right.
Most of it came through. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit. I want to get into your first 30 days or so, because you just kind of stepped out of that first 30-day mode. Just was reading the other day, Forrester released a Rise of Revenue Operations report. I don't know if you saw it, but in there it said that 57% of... Hang on a second. It says your video has been disabled due to internet quality issues.
Mine has?
Yeah.
Oh.
That's
weird.
It
doesn't say anything on my end. That's weird.
I haven't seen that before. It said, Doug's video has been disabled due to internet quality. Their video is still recorded. That's crazy.
All right.
All right, sorry about that. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit, and I want to get into your first 30 days on the job in RevOps. It was funny. I was reading a Forrester report the other day. They released this Rise of Revenue Operations report that said 57% of companies that they surveyed have said they've committed to invest in a RevOps function in the next 12 months, which was pretty high, honestly. I guess I would have thought maybe my head's too far in this whole ops thing, but I would have thought more companies have already adopted it, but apparently not. And WebPT is a good example because you just were hired for this role. They just started the function. So anyway, all that to say, what's been the most challenging part of the first 30 days for you, and how would you guide other people who are stepping into the RevOps role for the first time? How would you guide them on what to prioritize, like in your first month?
Yeah, it is a great number to hear. Obviously, RevOps is sexy right now, and it's kind of funny because I feel like 4 years ago ABM was sexy, so I'm starting to wonder if I'm just chasing sexy titles now or what.
Or it's chasing you.
Yeah, maybe they're just following me. I don't know. But I think it's interesting because I would agree with you. Like, it's one of those things where you look at it and you're like, the companies clearly should have this already. And then you realize that many don't, and I think that it's a hard question to answer because I think until you have somebody in that role digging into like, hey, sales, marketing, and finance are defining SQL differently. Who's asking that question before, right? Like, maybe some companies have sales ops people doing that. Maybe there's a finance analyst that's doing it. But the thing that I know in my gut is that the amount of feedback I got as soon as I started this team is there's a very clear need for RevOps, right? Like, hey, I have a list of, I don't know, I think it's up to like 75 requests from people across the three teams that we focus on primarily. So that kind of parlays into the second part of your question is, what is the hardest part? It's as soon as the fire truck arrives, everybody wants you to help put out their fire. So really prioritizing the work is probably been the most challenging piece because as you're learning how all of these processes interact with each other, you're also having to actively reprioritize the work.
Yeah.
And again, everybody thinks their fire is the most important fire. So we kind of started looking at, hey, we have a pretty quick check on the things that we focus on primarily and what we put at the top of our list is this affecting customer experience, and is it costing us money? And if either of those things are true, that's what puts it at the top of the list immediately. And that's, I imagine that will always be true for the work that we're doing, because that's really the focus, right? Is making sure that lead to cash is optimized and people have a good time interacting with our brand in the process.
Yeah, you mentioned the list, and you alluded to the ClickUp list that you use to manage inbound or internal requests that come into RevOps earlier. I think that's a super cool thing that pretty much every RevOps person or every RevOps lead should put in place. Can you share in detail what was the moment where you're like, we need a public we need a public domain where people can see what's going on in RevOps, so that I quit getting pulled in so many different directions, or at least people understand that, hey, this is just I have so much on my plate, I can't get to your thing right now. What was the moment that you realized we need somewhere publicly to put this the inbound request?
Yeah, I think the first piece was feeling overwhelmed with the amount of requests, right? Where you're just like, how do I manage all this? And I have some background in project management, so immediately I'm like, I need to find a solution for this. The other couple things that jumped out to me is, chatting with some people on our product team and thinking more about, RevOps having roadmap, things like that. As we get the function defined and some of the issues more stabilized, we'll probably start looking at like service pack type stuff where we're focusing on specific functions or processes within the company. But to do all of that, you have to have a system where you track everything. And so I think the third piece of that is, having a background in marketing and knowing the value of selling the work that you're doing, even if it seems silly to sell people the projects that you're knocking off the priority list. People see that as momentum, right? And especially if you're starting a team inside of a company that's never had RevOps, there will likely be a lot of people who are like, oh, thank God you're here. I need you to solve all these issues. And getting early and frequent wins is really important. I think if you set the expectation like, hey, RevOps is here, they're going to help with all these issues, and then no one hears from you for 3 months, they're just like, cool. I don't like, this is just more of the same potentially if you've had issues with that stuff before. And so I'm a big fan of early, frequent wins and publicizing the work that we're focused on so that people feel heard. And so that internal project list that we have through ClickUp, I have it hosted on a Google site that everybody in the company has access to. And we basically just stack rank the work we're doing and also keep track of where it's at in the pipeline, so to speak. So does the process change in review with another team? And if so, who's it with? Is it pending a release from our Salesforce team? Are we working on it now, or is it in the queue so you know it's coming up? We try and keep that list to about 10, so it's like the top 10 things we're focused on. Occasionally it'll grow or shrink from that, but I meet with the team weekly and we basically talk through, here's what our priorities are right now. Are you guys good with that? My plan going forward is probably to start doing that in 2-week sprints so we can take on larger projects. But right now we're doing a lot of quality of life updates and things that sales or success has been like, we've been asking for this for a while, but no one's really had the time to think about it. And I think that's the value of RevOps, right? Like, there's the teams that you are focusing on and the teams that you're supporting. Sales typically is not going to care about the integration between Zoom and Chorus. They do when it breaks. And they do when you start asking questions about reporting and they're like, well, I don't know. I'm a sales leader. I don't know how to set this stuff up. When we get into, some of the success issues too, it's the same thing, right? Like, this Gainsight talk to Salesforce. We need to have a person on our staff who does that, but usually that's a split duty between a success rep who's passionate about a system and they also have to manage a book of business. So having a RevOps team that's focused on the complexities of all those interactions to take some of that burden off has been, obviously one of the reasons I think people are really excited about having RevOps here right now, but in general too.
Yeah. In your quest to have some early and quick wins, did you make sure to spread those wins out across functions? You know what I'm saying? Or so that everyone's happy early on? Or how did you negotiate all the requests from different functions?
I haven't run into being labeled as somebody who has a favorite child yet. I'm sure I'll get there. But I would say, looking at the list, we kind of sat back for a couple of weeks and just said, hey, send everything our way. Start copying us on emails, and we'll intake all of this. There were a handful of issues that frequently came up across teams, and those very quickly became our priorities. So I would say, I imagine there are a lot of operations folks like myself who have strong opinions about how things should be done, and how they would do them. If you're coming into an established org, or if you're starting Rev-Ops from scratch, something that a former leader of mine said to me that sticks with me to this day is seek first to understand. So before you jump in and say like, hey, this process is broken, here's how you should do it, ask people why it's done that way. What are the things that I'm thinking about that need to be addressed before I start jumping into solving this problem? And that honestly has saved me a lot of headaches already, because there's a few processes where they hit our desk and I'm like, well, this is a simple fix. We just need to do X, Y, and Z. And then I run it by a few people and find out that sales has a consideration in this that maybe I didn't address, or that some of our operations teams like, you can't do that because we need these items to be in this record. And, you know, it's things like that. Once you start to get into the details, it's really important to make sure you have a full understanding before you jump into action. So, yeah, haven't had to navigate being accused of having a favorite team yet. Thankfully, it seems like the majority of the Rev org is aligned around the issues that we need to focus our energy on. But as that work list dwindles down, I'm sure there will be more niche asks that we get.
Yeah. Another thing that I just get in mind is, so how much of this first 30 days has been getting everyone aligned in the company on definitions of all your metrics? Because if you've never had RevOps, I don't know how there could be organization-wide buy-in on all the definitions, and you know, whether it's MQL or SQL, sales accepted lead, et cetera, all the stages in ops. Like, has that been part of it, or did you guys have that pretty baked out before you jumped in to the role?
We had most of it baked out, and I think from where I was sitting before, there's definitely, I was like, this is well oiled. But what I'm finding is, you know, I have an analyst on my team. That's the first hire we made. And the more he digs in and starts asking questions about like, well, what about this fringe case or this edge case? Like, how would we define an SQL here? It's opened some interesting discussions around like, hey, we need to unify this. And so he and I are actually starting a data dictionary right now off of that, which is basically like, here's what a DQ is, here's what an MQL is, here's what MQL is. Some of it is maybe not necessary because I think most people agree with how we would define it, but it's making sure that all of our reporting processes keep that stuff in mind too.
Oh yeah, it's critical. What's an example of one of those edge cases? Just for I'm curious.
Yeah, so a good example of an edge case would be we had SQLs basically just rolling up in a few reports as MQLs minus DQs, just assuming sales has qualified everything that hasn't been disqualified. We found a negligible difference, but a difference nonetheless. And obviously, if we're focused on MQL quality, it's going to change some of the metrics. So leads that haven't been accepted or started to be worked by marketing already or by sales already that are in a new status were being rolled up as an SQL. So it's a very small, like I think it changed our lead quality by like 0.5% so far this year. So it's not a huge difference, but it's one of those things where, you know, we call it out to marketing like, hey, those are just sitting in new. So that's a conversation you should be having with sales. Like, what are we doing with these leads? These are things we delivered to you. So why haven't they been qualified? And if they haven't, should we disqualify them or put them back into a drip? Mm-hmm. So I think that's a good example of where having more sophisticated reporting and somebody digging into all of those connection points can help identify even opportunity, right? Sales is like, hey, we need more leads. It's like, what about these ones that are new?
Yeah. Do you guys have a like a dashboard where like a data check dashboard or any other like anything else that would catch something like that, or did it take somebody really digging in and running specific reports? Like, how do you manage the quality on an ongoing basis? Is another way of asking it.
That we have that report now, and I think the process of building that report is what identified this. So we have two kick-ass analysts that I work with regularly, one in finance and one on my team, and we basically have built a series of very robust Google Sheets dashboards that pull like live feeds from Salesforce every 4 hours and update metrics according, lead pacing, bookings pacing, all that stuff. And when we start digging into that and building the reports that feed into that, that's when we're like, wait, there's a few things that are missing here that I think we need to call out. So that prompted some really good discussion with sales and marketing leadership as well.
Very cool. All right, last question for you, Doug. So you're currently reporting to the CRO. Your CRO kind of was like, I'm going to start this Rev-Ops function. You hired a Rev-Ops analyst. I want to hear about your dream Rev-Ops team as you look 2-3 years down the road.
All right. I'm going to answer that. Just one sec.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have a lot of thoughts. Cool. So, yeah, if I'm looking at my dream RevOps team, right, I think the first hire we made here, this is akin to the tech stack question, like what's your dream tech stack? It totally depends on the business. So,
oh yeah,
with that caveat in mind, for us, I'm definitely a data guy, but I know my limitations around it. So I wanted to get somebody in here who could really help us quantify where we're at today, help us build benchmarking, help us build reporting, so that as we start to focus more on process improvement and optimization, we have a scorecard to measure against. So our analyst has been amazing at getting a lot of that foundational reporting set up, as well as something he refers to, see what we can see, which is like, I want to answer some complex questions. What do we have the capability to do today, and what do we need to start focus on solutioning so we can answer this question later? A good example would be like cohort reporting. If we want to look at lifetime value or time to second purchase, we need to know how long somebody's been a customer, like with an exact date, so we can cohort stuff into buckets. And we just rolled that into our new Salesforce org this past week. But that was an identification from the analyst who was like, I want to just not do point-in-time reporting every month. I want to look at cohorts. So it's been really good from a foundational perspective for the RevOps team. But obviously, sales, marketing, and success are reaping the benefits of having way better reporting than we did before. Mm-hmm. I would say beyond that, I have a handful of positions that I'm planning on bringing on in the next year or so. One of those is a tech stack person, so a system admin.
Yeah.
Probably groom them into becoming a delegated administrator for Salesforce so they can help with some of the development work. But the primary thing is like we've got over a dozen tools in our stack right now, and typically they're managed in silos. Sales is in control of outreach and chorus. Marketing cares about Visivo and Alice and Terminus. Success cares about Gainsight. So my plan with that position is really to bring somebody in who can not necessarily administer every tool, because obviously there's going to be some management considerations from each of those functions, but somebody who can be a trusted advisor to each of those people when they're like, hey, I wish this tool would do X, Y, or Z, or is there any way we can pull this data into the tool so we can make better decisions? That's that person. I think the other core role that I'm really looking forward to hiring is like a specialist project management type role that can help coordinate all the team's efforts. Obviously, I'm doing that right now, but I want to really focus on strategy and get out of the weeds, and having somebody who can really help manage that stuff. A generalist, right? Somebody who understands the needs of all the people on the team, but also can really plug in and get their hands dirty. And then I'm also planning on bringing somebody in to focus on enablement, both from sales and success, which are our partners on the RevOps team, but also marketing and making sure that everybody's got what they need to do their job from a sales and success enablement perspective, as well as focusing on training, new rep ramp. How do we get everybody set up in all the systems that we need them in so they can hit the ground running? That person will take over a lot of that work. And so those are all things, by the way, like as we talk about the value of RevOps, all that stuff exists in silos if you don't have RevOps. So sales training is completely different than marketing training, or success training is completely different than marketing training. Trying to get all those things into a unified definition really helps align those teams, and obviously the more aligned those teams are, the more consistent the member journey is, and that's really the focus for us right now.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, I lied. This is my last question now. So you guys started a RevOps function around 100 million. When do you think, which is I think a little late, you would admit that too, a little late for a lot of tech companies who are starting it earlier, especially that's the trend, right? When's the right time, you think? Is it based on number of reps, which means like there's a certain amount of data that's being produced? Is it based on revenue? Is it based on, what do you think it's based on?
I'm probably biased as somebody who has always been a software and process nerd. Honestly, like you need somebody to get sales and marketing off the ground, and then you need somebody to build the systems with you. It's got to be one of your first hires, because I use, again, another analogy, but you wouldn't just like start building a house in the middle of a field. You know, like you need to survey the land, you need a foundation to build upon, you need plumbing, you need sewage, you need electrical. All that stuff fuels the future growth for the company. And I can't tell you how many times every company I've been at, every person I've talked to who's dealt with Salesforce hates Salesforce because it was probably built by somebody, 3 admins ago when the company first started. There was no real strategy to it. It was just like, we need somewhere to dump our data. So I think the cool part about where RevOps is at right now is that it's trendy. Everyone's excited about it. I hope that lends itself to people realizing, hey, I need to bring someone in like stat before we start buying software, and really think about how are we going to architect this from the ground up. And you probably want to get a generalist to start, just because you're not going to hire like a VP of RevOps right out of the gate. But having somebody who can help get in the weeds and set up the systems and make sure that they align to the marketing and sales strategy, I would hire early for that, because otherwise you're just building on a busted foundation potentially, and that RevOps hire down the line is going to have to do all the cleanup work. So
one of your first 5 or 10 hires on the go-to-market team, it sounds like.
Yeah, that would be. I mean, again, I'm biased, and where I'm at right now, I wish we would have done that, But I think anybody who's got the benefit of hiring a position like that early, and teaching, like if they're a marketing ops person, teach them sales ops. If they're sales ops, teach them marketing. I think people who are in those functions can pick up the nuance of all the individual roles you're supporting pretty quickly. And so, I would definitely first 5 to 10 hires for sure.
Yeah, you're biased, but you're allowed to be biased. You've held just about every role on the revenue side that you can. So you're allowed. You've seen it all. Doug, it's been awesome to talk to you for the last hour or so. Thanks so much for your time. Hey, best of luck here as you get out of the first quarter and into your future months as a head of RevOps, and good luck building the team. Sounds like you're building an awesome foundation. Come back and talk to us again after another 12 or 18 months, all right?
Sounds good, man. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks.